Hello and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the and stuff. This is episode number 125, where Eric had the opportunity to interview Dr. Karen Naufel from Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. But before we get to that, the Psych Sessions podcast is brought to you by Hawks Learning. Are you looking for more affordable, quality materials for your intro psych students? Check out Hawks Learning's mastery-based courseware and texts. These materials introduce foundational psychology and research concepts that inspire students of all majors to think more critically about the world around them. Students and instructors benefit from built-in support features like error-specific feedback, explanatory videos, and detailed progress reports. Explore Hawks Learning's mastery-based intro psych materials, available to students for as low as $43, and free chapter projects and example videos exclusively for Psych Sessions listeners at www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions. Again, that's www.hawkslearning.com/psych sessions. Hi listeners, Garth here. I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you because Psych Sessions just passed 100,000 downloads. Yeah, it's a lot, and we couldn't do it without you. So thanks for listening. Thank you to all the guests who have been on the show. Thank you for all the hosts who are now hosting various programs as a part of the Psych Sessions family, and there's more to come. We've got hosts who are recording episodes right now, and we're packaging those and going to put those into series and release them to you here in the second part of 2021. And we're not stopping anytime soon. So please share Psych Sessions. If you haven't had a chance to rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, we invite you to go there right now even and leave a rating for that. It helps us, and it will help Psych Sessions get out to more teachers of psychology. Also, feel free to share particular episodes or to use Psych Sessions episodes in your courses or maybe with grad students. We have lots of programming related to many different things, including writing and career and professional development. Also oral history with some wonderful giants in our field and more. And there's more to come. So thank you. And if you ever have an idea for Psych Sessions, please reach out to us. We're easy to find. Now, before you hear this interview with Karen Naufel, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. I don't remember where I first met Karen, but I remember thinking, who is this happy psychologist? If you've ever met Karen or you've ever worked with her, she's perpetually happy. I'm sure that's not true, but that is my perception, and she is an absolute pleasure to work with. So I remember having other thoughts, too, as I got to know Karen a little better. Beyond happy, who is this super smart person? And then at some point, I remember being in an email correspondence and thinking, who is this courageous person? Before I realized that she is an advocate at heart. She's also a leader, and she is an innovator. She solves problems in really interesting ways, and I personally appreciate that. All right, so I have a question for the listener. Who is Squashy? Well, Karen knows Squashy very well, and Squashy may give us, as listeners, a lot of insight into Karen's unique skill set and expertise, so you're going to want to learn about Squashy. Again, I don't want to ruin it, but this just shows how cool Karen is. that Squashy exists and serves the purpose that Squashy does. So, Karen's a generalist, and she could have gone to a number of different places, but she ended up going to grad school at the University of Arkansas, the same place that she did her undergraduate degree. And one of the selling points when she went there, other than the fact that they did a very, very good job initially, years earlier, with their the way that they accepted her into the college, you'll want to listen for that. From a student-centered perspective and just caring for students, it was a pretty cool story. But when she went into the graduate program, psychology program at the University of Arkansas, they told her, you get to teach in your third year. And she loved that. And so we all wish that more programs would have that kind of attitude toward teaching, don't we? At one point, Karen was looking into industry. Of course, she was CIA, Department of Defense, doing research there. And next time we have a coffee, Karen, I'll have you tell me about all of that because I'm fascinated by it. But there are other generalist themes that come through this episode. I'll list a few. How about teaching preschoolers psychology or advocating for research assistant protections? Or teaching the psychology of evil and coming up with some pretty cool assignments to assess student learning. Karen has also worked cross-discipline with other folks, and we get to hear about all of this in this interview with Eric. I found this other thread in here that, I don't know, I tend to smell it when it's around, and it is this thread of service and justice and it's no wonder Karen came from a family that volunteered a lot, and so she saw service as an important part of just kind of living in this world. And so she watched her parents volunteer. She volunteered growing up, and I really do think that this has influenced a lot of her decisions, because her decisions or her career as a generalist kind of reflects her multiple interests. But she also had multiple interests in kind of choosing what she was going to do when she was early in her college years. And so these also reflect this thread of service. Speech pathology or deaf education, social work, pre-med. These are the ones that she thought about. And I've actually heard her talk about students in this same kind of helping way, these kinds of helping professions, and now more than just a teacher, helping students. Karen seems to really want to be in service to others. I appreciate that about her. Karen, it just reminds me that you are not only a great instructor, but also a great person. I know that Karen does a lot of other things that they didn't get to in this episode. So she's on CABE at APA, that's the Committee for Associate and Baccalaureate Education. And she is involved in a million other things, including the Introductory Psychology Initiative and some other things. So anyway, it's absolutely impressive how much she does. It's amazing the quality of work that she and then the level that she works at in doing all of these things. And overall, if you ever had the chance to collaborate or work with Karen on anything, I would highly recommend it. You're going to have a good time, and it's going to be great work. All right, I will let you get to the episode here. This is Eric Landrum with Karen Naufel.
Welcome back to another episode of Psych Sessions. I'm so delighted to be here today with Dr. Karen Naufel from Georgia. I was going to get it wrong. I'm so excited to see you. Georgia Southern University from Statesboro, Georgia. And welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, that's very kind of you to lie right off the bat. I really appreciate it. We've known each other for a long time, and whether you like it or not, I consider you a friend. And so I appreciate I appreciate you taking the time today. I saw you recently in the back of the APA Monitor on Psychology. Your picture was back there. They have the picture of the movers and shakers towards the back of the magazine where they have the section I'm talking about?
I do know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, I still get the paper copy. I know some people get the electronic copy. I'm old school. And this is a month or two ago, not that long ago. And I'm flipping through my magazine at home, and there you are. You're there. And I'm not going to get the name, but I'm going to ask you to describe it. But it was about something to do with COVID and education in the community. And I believe you had been recognized in your community. Can you tell our listeners about what that was all about?
Oh, absolutely. I'm privileged to be a part of this group called Squashing the Spread of Bullitt County. And we started this initiative back in July. Michelle Martin started it. And what we did is we just wanted to make sure that COVID was mitigated in our community as best as we can. And so we did a lot of things. We started off with pairing up with the city of Statesboro, and we disseminated over 70,000 masks to the citizens of Bullitt County. And then we also started creating something called Ask Squashy, which is an advice column, trying to get people some information about COVID-19 from a public health perspective and just answer basic questions about what is the city doing in terms of celebrating Halloween and so on. And we also created toolkits as well to help people mitigate the spread and know what to do with all the social restrictions. Like, how can you celebrate New Year's Eve when we really should be getting together? And so we created all these toolkits as well. And we're still working. We've turned to vaccine, trying to promote everybody getting vaccines. And it's been a really, truly wonderful experience. And go ahead.
No, so I'm just thinking, so there was a column, Dear Squashy. Did people write in? Now, were they real letters from people, or did you have to generate like fake ones at first?
It was funny because we were getting so many questions from people.
Oh, awesome.
And I just absolutely love being a psychologist for this reason. I would be walking along and I would get a text and someone would ask me a question about COVID-19. How do I talk to someone who doesn't believe it's real? And so what we decided to do is Megan Pearsons and I were talking and we're like, we should just have an advice column where we could take these questions and answer them in that column. And so a lot of times the questions come from real life people just asking just randomly, hey, what should we do in this situation? Or they'll post it on our board or send us a private message. And so
you were answering, so you were Squashy.
I was Squashy some of the time. We all take turns according to our expertise. Yeah, but I was Squashy part of the time.
Dear Squashy, I'm working at home on my laptop. Do I have to wear a mask? And you might be the person that answered that question.
I could be the person to answer that question. So
you are the Dear Abby of the 21st century.
Maybe the Dear Abby of COVID-19, at least within the expertise that I have.
And Karen, in all seriousness, I think the Dear Abby and Dear Ann Landers, the sisters of that era, I honestly believe that they did more to promote mental health in the latter half of the 20th century than maybe any psychologist of the day. They had a syndicated column that reached millions of Americans, and millions of Americans read that, and thousands wrote in. And I remember as a kid and as a young adult, people would write in and ask, I'm in this relationship. A woman would write in, should I leave my husband? And I think the famous Dear Abby reply was, are you better off with him or without him, kind of thing. And I started off teasing you about Squashy, but seriously, you said it, that fun part of being a psychologist and giving it away and making a difference. I think that Dear Abby, Dear Ann Landers of the 20th century and what you did in your community really does make a difference, and it shows what our discipline can give.
Well, thank you. I never really thought about it like that. It was just more that we had a need and we had a lot of information out there trying to just get it out.
So Karen, I'm not sure I know what your training background is. So were you trained as a health psychologist or a cognitive psychologist? What's your academic training?
So I was lucky enough to have a general experimental psychology background, and it focused mainly on social cognition. And one of the lovely things was about my program, and I went to University of Arkansas. One of the wonderful things about going there was we really did get a lovely generalist education. So I knew a lot about learning. I knew a lot about physio. I knew a lot about social psychology and cognition. And it has really helped me in doing this applied work because I can draw from those different areas. And I can see the connections among those different areas because we were always learning about that and talking about that. And we had a focus area research meeting every other Tuesday where we would see everybody else's research. So it gave a nice breadth of training. And so that's my background there.
I think in all the interviews I've done on psych sessions, I think you're probably the first person I can remember that had that generalist training, that generalist PhD, which is obviously, if you look at the list of specialties, it's been there probably forever, but not usually very popular because it's general, or pardon the expression, generic, because most people take a deeper dive after undergraduate. If I can ask, what drew you to the generalist specialty? Maybe I can't say it like that. The generalist generality.
What drew me, basically University of Arkansas drew me in as a whole. And as an undergraduate who suddenly decided to go to grad school in psychology, I knew I knew the faculty there, and I knew that I could do a line of research that I was interested in. I was interested in health psychology, and I did apply to specifically health psychology programs.
Oh, okay.
And one of the big things, I interviewed at a few different places, and I liked them all. But what really drew me to Arkansas was that they really cared about teaching. And so just the way that they phrased it was like, you get to teach in your third year, as opposed to you have to teach in your third year. It was seen as this big privilege to teach. And at the time, I didn't even really want to be a teacher or a professor, but just the way that they were excited about teaching made me want to go there.
And I'm going to apologize in advance if I veer towards the too personal. So when you're applying to graduate school, are you roughly around 22 years old?
Yeah, this is not personal at all. I was 21 years old when I applied to grad school.
Okay. So
I was not even legally able to drink on my interview.
You were or were not?
I was not.
So if you were 21, that means you're an overachiever at some point, and maybe we'll circle back to that. You skipped a grade somewhere. So what I asked that is because that's a pretty savvy perception. At age 21, you're on graduate school interviews, and you detect that when the graduate program says you get to teach in our program, you don't go, oh crap, I have to teach. You go, wow, look at what they're presenting. They're presenting this opportunity that I get to teach. And I hadn't even thought about it, but that's different than how these other programs have been presenting it. I have to tell you that I perceive that as very savvy for someone who's 21 or 22. And I got to tell you, I wasn't thinking that at all when I was 21 or 22.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think it's part because my undergrad program was so strong in teaching, and it was at Arkansas as well. And the grad students just loved teaching so much that perhaps they modeled for me how incredibly valuable that experience was.
So your undergrad was at U of A?
It was.
Okay. And let's be clear, is that what they call it there, U of A, or am I getting the terminology correct? So
I have people say U of A. We just usually say Arkansas.
Arkansas.
As the only one. Or at least my group did.
Okay, so Arkansas. So undergraduate Arkansas, and then straight into the doctoral program.
Yes.
Okay. And the question that I get sometimes that maybe I'll ask you, because I think any student listeners might really be interested in this. Looking back on it now, do sometimes students fear if they're an undergrad at Oregon State and they stay for their graduate degree at Oregon State, they worry about that one institution only type of experience. And you are a product of that, unless I'm missing that you left for a master's and came back.
Yep.
So undergrad, grad, one place. I'm guessing that your perception is you had an amazing experience from what I can detect. Were there any drawbacks to that? Am I correct that you thought it was a pretty amazing experience?
Professionally speaking, I thought it was an amazing experience, and I don't regret staying there at all. The training that I got, it fit me very well. My mentor, Denise Spikey, she was very supportive of really anything that I wanted to do afterwards. So it wasn't like you have to be a hardcore researcher and publish or perish. She valued that I enjoyed teaching, and she knew that's what I wanted to do. She also appreciated that I might want to go into private sector. At the time I did. And she's great. Let's talk about this. And so I am really glad that I stayed there. Additionally, I did not see other ways for a while. And I had always been in that department. And so I knew that this department worked like this and this one curriculum was like this. And when I got to be a faculty member and requirements were different and not everyone had the same curriculum, that was something that was new to me. I'm not sure how much I would have gotten from being an undergrad, though, and knowing that difference anyway. From professionally, I think that was a really good decision. The one part that was a little bit hard was I stayed through. And so I had a pretty close set of friends still in Fayetteville when I started my first year of graduate school, whereas the graduate cohort coming in, and they were all new, so they were making friends. And so that was one part that I had to be careful with, because my friends were going to graduate soon, and then how do I connect with others? And that was something that was a little bit hard for me, was trying to figure out how do I make sure that I have social networks around and make friends and be a part of the program and not just cling to the undergrad.
Oh, that's a really good tip. It's something that I wouldn't have thought about, but I think that's really good advice, actually, even for the faculty members listening, to offer to students. Because I don't ever try to talk a student who has been at one program and is applying to that same graduate program within their university. I would never try to talk them out of it. But I think that's really good advice to give them, to be thoughtful about the connections they already have, but not to cling too deeply to those, because you're networking with your future colleagues when those graduate students come in and eventually will scatter after they all graduate. That is a really good point. But Karen, from what I surmised from you were saying earlier, as an undergraduate getting ready to graduate, you did apply to other places, though, in addition to Arkansas.
I did.
And boy, I may be embarrassed in a moment and have to apologize. And I'm assuming you got accepted to other places as well.
I did.
Okay, good. I don't have to apologize too badly. So
yeah.
What's nice about that, I think, for you and for other students maybe listening to this, is that you didn't feel like you were stuck, so to speak. You chose Arkansas as your graduate program. It wasn't the last resort, or it wasn't the only option. You chose them purposefully.
Very much so.
Okay. All right. And you said also you were interested in industry. What triggered that?
I wanted to do something with health. And I always wanted to do something with health. And I just loved applied psychology. And so whenever I heard anything in psychology, my first instinct is to, great, let's invent something with this and a program, something like, how can we make that happen? And so I had envisioned myself doing a few different things. One was I envisioned myself working within a hospital and helping with research within a hospital-like setting and helping healthcare providers figure out how to provide high-quality care. And then the other one was also doing government work for like the Central Intelligence Agency or the FBI. Those were my other dreams, was to go into Department of Defense, like an intelligence agency work and do research.
Are you an inventor? Meaning, do you like implementing programs? The Squashy is a program that seriously is a program that you helped invent and implement. It's an intervention. I'll bet you all collected data before and after and along the way. Is that a theme in your life that you like to invent?
I like to see myself as, it's something that I like to do. I like to develop interventions using psychology.
So where do you think that came from?
That's a good question. I know my family is very active, and my dad is a huge volunteer, and his background is not the kind that you would normally assume to do all these volunteer projects. He's an accountant, but every volunteer agency desperately needs an accountant, and so he would go in and help with that. And so public service has always been pretty big in the family and trying to help others. And so I do know that I was exposed to that growing up. So that might be a place that it came from. I've always enjoyed it. I'm trying to think if there was a time in my life where I wasn't doing something like this. And I don't remember that far back, so to speak.
Okay, let's travel a little bit back in time. This is a question that's one of my trademark questions. When you were growing up, was the question in the household, will you go to college, or was the question, which college will you go to?
My parents both encouraged college, but they were also very open to really anything that I wanted to do as long as I could support myself in some way. And in terms of, I looked at technical schools and I looked at community college, and my mom had gotten her licensed practical nursing back in the 70s. And she did very well with that. And I was always interested in nursing. I think the big thing was what college would you go to? Because in my mind, I was always going to go to college. And I never knew what I wanted to do for sure, but every career choice always involved a college degree. And so that was something that I personally was striving for.
And when you were growing up, were you living in Arkansas?
I was living all over the country, but mainly Oklahoma.
So when you started your undergraduate, where were you living?
When I started undergraduate, I was living in Oklahoma.
So what was the draw to Arkansas as an undergraduate?
Oh, they were amazing. And it's one of those things that you don't realize how much that personal touch means to a student until you get that. Because I had applied to Oklahoma State and I had applied to OU, I think. I know I had applied to a lot of state schools. And I filled out this comment card at a on-campus college fair, never giving Arkansas a thought. And they called me up and they sold me on it. And they invited me for a visit, and the admissions counselor, she read over my essays to make sure I didn't have any typos. And she was helping me find these amazing scholarships. And when they accepted me, they sent me this beautiful certificate that had gold lettering on it. And it was just I felt so special. And at that point, I was just set on I was going to go to Arkansas. So.
No, I agree completely with you. My story is 2 decades before yours, but I applied the two places I wanted to go were both in Illinois, and one was a small private liberal arts school and one was a huge state school. In the small private liberal arts school, the admissions counselor called me and talked to me on the phone, and that made the difference for me. I got that personal touch from a human being as opposed to a form letter that had to have been printed on a dot matrix printer back in that day. And that personal touch from those, for me, a small school, but you got a personal touch from a huge school. And somebody made the difference. Yeah, absolutely.
I still remember her. And she was amazing. And I'm so glad that I went there.
Well, yeah, from all accounts, you just had an amazing experience in Arkansas, so much so that you have stayed in that part of the country, right? I mean, what I want to keep back. I know I'm bouncing around, so I'm sorry, but after Arkansas was your first job at Georgia Southern?
Yes, it was.
So you really have stayed in that part of you haven't gone back towards the center of the country.
I have not. I have not.
So you really, at least for now, have really found that place, that sector of the country that you enjoy.
I do.
Yeah. So I want to go back. So when you go to Arkansas, is psychology your first declared major?
When I went to Arkansas, psychology was not my first declared major.
May we have the list, please, in order?
I don't know if I can even name it all. I started off when I toured Arkansas. I actually was looking at communication disorders because I wanted to go into speech pathology or perhaps even deaf education. And so that's when I toured there. And then I wanted to go into social work. And that was one of the majors. And that one, I was in first year orientation with the social work advisor. And I had come in with AP credits, lots of advanced placement credits. And she didn't want me to use them, and she wanted me to retake these courses. Mm-hmm. And I knew that's not what I wanted to do. And so I actually went across the hall. Like, it was more of a building. I remember just like getting up, and I went to the psychology advising session. And one of my heroes, Dr. Freund, was there, and he met with me, and he knew I was interested in psychology. And he kept asking me, so have you had English? And I'm like, yeah, I have AP credit. And he's like, how about government? AP credit. And he just made phone calls, and I got into all these other classes. And he got me into his statistics class, and I loved it. Yeah, he was great. Yeah, and so I did psychology for kind of a little bit, but I was always pre-med, and I tried to switch to nursing for a little bit, and then I was back in pre-med, and then I looked at microbiology for a little bit, but I was always taking psychology courses with it. And it wasn't really until my senior year that I really abandoned going to medical school and decided to go into psychology, where it clicked that I really need to listen to what I'm doing and not. Yeah. And I'm glad I did.
Karen, there's a theme emerging for me, and I kind of want to see if I'm in the ballpark. You have very eclectic interests.
Oh, yes, very much so.
And I mean that, I don't mean that in a negative way at all. You sadly remind me of me. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way either. You have a lot of interest in a lot of areas, and I don't know if it's because you get bored easily in one area so that you switch. I know you have a lot of different research areas, and I'll get to those eventually. But even the things that you changed interest in as an undergrad, as a major, or the general PhD that you earned in psychology gives you the broadest path possible to study the most topics, because you didn't have to take that deep dive into one area. And plus, I'm just trying to wrap my head around, how does a student coming out of high school, how many students want to study communication and, did you call it deaf education?
Deaf education, yes.
again, that shows a level of maturity that most 17, 18-year-olds don't have.
I can attribute it to the Babysitters Club.
Oh, the movie, The Babysitter's Club.
No, the book series.
Oh, the book series. Okay.
Yeah. They had a book in there. It's called Jessie's Secret Language. And she babysat for a child who was deaf. And they talked all about the different schools. And when I read that, I was like, oh, I want to do that. And I was very young. I don't know how old for sure, but I knew that was something that opened my eyes to that it was there. So.
Were you a voracious reader as a kid?
Very much. That's where my money went, was books.
To books, yeah. And I don't want to venture too much into the personal, but so far, is your daughter also a voracious reader?
Yes, very much.
Okay.
So, yes.
All right. Awesome. Do you have brothers or sisters?
I do. I have 2 older brothers.
2 older brothers. Okay. And if you don't mind, can you give me the age gaps?
15 and 11 years.
So you have a brother 15 years older than you. You have a brother 11 years older than you. And then 11 years later, you come along.
I did.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to leave the armchair psychology alone on that one. And I'm just Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. I think off the air, maybe we'll have a fun conversation someday about what that could mean. I have a brother 19 years older, a brother 14 years older, and a sister 8.5 years older. So I understand the gaps and what they might or might not mean. And plus, there's a really fun literature on birth order too that people get a kick out of. I got to go here while I'm here in this part of your life. What were you interested in high school? What type of student were you interested in? And what type of activities did you do?
Oh, I was an overachiever.
No, I'm stopping the podcast right here. No way.
I was an overachiever. I really did love, I love school. And my mom tells people stories of how I was reading like science textbooks in the back of the car when we took road trips, and I just really enjoyed it. I really liked doing the service organizations a lot as well. I did Key Club, the volunteer organization. That was one of my favorite organizations that I was a part of.
That makes sense.
And, yes. And I just really like being involved whenever I could be involved. So if there was something that I could join, I was one of the people that joined it and always raised my hand. So
if mom or dad got you out of school for something family related, you hated that. You hated missing school.
I did hate missing school because if you missed, like, you would have to take the final if you missed too many days. And I never wanted to take the final.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I do remember that so looking back, that's one of the things, like, because I remember going when I really was sick and I probably shouldn't have been going, because those incentives there mean something. But yeah, that was something there. In terms of like family functions, those were always fun. I eagerly missed for my brother's wedding when he got married. And so, yeah, so I don't recall missing too much for family things, and family was always very important too. And so I never minded for that. So usually if I was missing for a family event, it was because something major was happening.
And I don't want to stereotype, so I'm just going to come out and ask. But I'm guessing that maybe you might be one of the key organizers of those family events.
So my mom is a huge planner. And so, yeah, she is a huge planner. So she can plan very well. And she's a key organizer to many of the events. But my family in Nebraska, where my mom is from, they know how to put on a party, and they just all get together. And we get together, and it's just so easy up there. And it's a great it's a great event. Like family events up there can happen at the drop of a dime.
That's awesome.
You just go. It's wonderful.
And I'm sure that you'll be looking forward to after when the pandemic is over to being able to see them more often.
I can't wait.
Yeah, I'll bet that's absolutely true. So, Karen, I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I do want to talk about that eclectic, what I believe to be an eclectic program of research, because I think you study a lot of things that are just pure interesting to you. And again, please don't take this the wrong way. You remind me of me in that I have studied probably 20 different topics in my career and never published deeply in any of them. Although I do think there are some themes when I look back. But for example, one of the things that you've gotten into lately is, and I'll let you explain the details of this, the ethics of serving as a research assistant. That is something that you have shown a great deal of concern about. In fact, I don't have a portable camera at this moment, but there's a poster right outside my office that I think is a PDF that you created that has how to protect the rights of undergraduate research assistants.
Oh, I'm honored that you...
Right outside my door.
Looked at that.
Yep.
Yeah, that is, if I had to say what I am all about, I would probably say that is my biggest cause in some ways. And it started again with a conversation with my former mentor at Arkansas, Denise Beike, when we started realizing that research assistants and researchers can experience a lot of risks, but there's really not guidelines for how to mitigate those risks. And a lot of people, professors, mentors, they're not like evil conspirators who want to hurt their students,
right,
but they just never have thought about these things. And so that's a really big goal, is to try to identify what can help people think about these things. And so that way this can be an opportunity for our students to learn research, but also not to put them in harm's way needlessly. And so that is something that is quite important to me. And it also allows me to explore my general interests as well, because it applies to areas outside of psychology so much. So,
but as you've taken a deep dive into that particular area, can you identify for our listeners maybe what are some of the riskiest areas for undergraduate or graduate research assistants for that matter? What are some of the scenarios people have told you about, or from research surveys that you've done? What are some things that faculty members should be aware of, if you can share some tips?
The psychological distress of coding narratives or transcribing narratives, it applies really to anyone that does that. If people are stuck listening to something traumatic over and over again, it can, even if they're just typing it, it can really wear on a person's soul. It can create almost like PTSD-like symptoms sometimes, is what people have anecdotally reported to me. Or I actually did that as part of my research assistantship my first year of grad school. And I was lucky enough to have a supervisor who was like, whoa, why don't we take some breaks here? Because it was getting to be too much to do that. And so that's something that comes up a lot. That and deception is the other one.
I would think with the first one that there are tools now that at the very least, the initial transcription could be done by machine or software, and perhaps the checking might have to be listened to. So I think there's probably still some threat or some risk, but hopefully it wouldn't have to be, unless there was coding for something other than just the word transcription. If you're coding for tone or something, I guess that might not be able to be done by machine.
Yeah, the transcription software has gotten a lot better since back in my day.
Yeah.
And so that can definitely help. But if a person is interviewing others, then you hear the stories over and over again.
Right. If you're watching a tape and you're really not transcribing, but you're coding a video for certain behaviors,
exactly.
Yeah, you are watching it over and over. That's a really good point. I think it's probably down that same road. I think oftentimes faculty members will recruit these really top bright students to be research assistants. And we don't spend the time giving them the training to prepare them for the pitfalls they might find. But when they find those pitfalls, then we give the corrective action and the support. It's almost, I think it's the version of what you just said. They experience the harm, then we put the bandage on after the fact. We don't tell them these are the potential pitfalls and you might be able to avoid needing the bandage altogether. As faculty members, we're so experienced in what we're doing. We know the frustrations of SPSS and where to avoid it. We don't think about, oh yeah, there's this 26-year-old doing this for me and they'll be just fine. And many times they are, but as you have discovered in your research, sometimes they're not.
And it's amazing how sometimes I hear about these stories. Oftentimes it's not through a hardcore collection of data, but I'll give a talk and say, hey, just want you all to be aware of this. And that's when people will come up afterwards and they'll send me their story. And it makes me wonder just exactly how prevalent is this happening? And even if it is just a small number, that's still a small number that is suffering that does not necessarily have to suffer.
I would imagine like other types of negative behaviors, I'm sure it's underreported. This is not a good analogy, and it's sexual violence, partner violence is always underreported. So negative outcomes of research collaborations, we hear reports of graduate students will have ideas stolen by their mentors, for example. I am sure that the prevalence of that is underreported in the literature. Even when grad students do report it, I'm sure it's underreported. The harms that do happen, I'm sure, are underreported compared to the actual frequency. Yeah. I did peek at a couple of things on your website. In the spirit of eclecticism, tell me about the psychology of evil.
Oh my goodness. I taught that class. I haven't taught it for a while, but that was one of my favorite classes to teach. And the way that it got started is very different from the way that it ended. But when I came to Georgia Southern, they already had social psych teachers. And I wanted to teach.
They're a dime a dozen, aren't they? You throw a rock in any direction, you hit a social psychologist, seriously.
Yeah. And all of the studies that I liked related to social psychology. And they were asking for a senior seminar topic that I could potentially teach. And I thought, ooh, psychology of evil, that'll be a good one. And then I could talk about social psych a lot. And it ended up being such a unique experience because it really changed how I saw what the psychology of evil was. We spend a lot of time in that course just defining, well, what do people perceive as evil exactly? And a lot of I had gone in there thinking that I would talk about like social psychology and throw in the old Milgram studies and things like that. And instead we talked a lot about perception. Why would this person view it as evil compared to this person? And what happens if you say something like you say, this person, I can explain why they did that. How does that affect their perception of you? And it was a really fun and thoughtful course. They had a great project at the end that I loved where they wrote a fairy tale trying to teach children about evil.
Awesome.
And also how to combat evil. And so they had to take concepts that they discussed in class to write a fairy tale, and they would perform it at the end of the year. And it was always so much fun.
So first off, it does sound fascinating. What an important topic, what a timely topic. And I love the creativity of the fairy tale because they have to take the psychological science, which they should have been learning all semester long, but then translate it into something that a general public type person could understand, but yet communicates the science. And Karen, the other piece of that's in there that hopefully your students explored, I think we all, me as well, we all tend to think of people as unidimensional, like good or evil, because that's easier. We want to put them in a bucket. It's just easier to keep track, to put them in a bucket, but we know that they're not.
We talked about that actually quite a bit. We also talked about basic stereotyping. So if someone has a good quality, why do people infer that everything is good?
Halo effect.
Right, the halo effect. Yeah. So we did explore a lot of those different types of topics in there and the psychological processes that underlie those.
Yeah, and do you feel like your students came away with any more clarity? And yeah, there was good in some people at some point. They're not necessarily good or evil. Maybe they're good and evil. I don't know. So.
Yeah, I think the students, one thing that I know that they got is that a lot of times it's not just personality. And it's the classic social personality kind of debate, is that in some instances things happen that the situation can convene. Sometimes it is personality, and sometimes there are some, other factors in there. But that this idea of what is evil is not just necessarily something simple that we can label, but rather a very complex thing that involves a lot of psychology. And so I do feel that students did walk away with that understanding that evil is not just one thing. It's a complex interaction of many things.
Well, then I think you gave them a real gift then. I really do believe that. It makes me think about, how can I work that in sometime? Because those seem like they would be very meaningful and rewarding conversations to have. Absolutely.
That was one of the best classes. I loved it.
I got to ask you about another thing too, before I run out of time with you. The applied social cognition of weather warnings.
Oh, yes.
Talk about someone who is eclectic and a generalist.
I love it. Yeah, that one came about in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there, a while ago. And we still have the lab going, but I was sitting in my office and two professors from other departments, Mark Welford and Brian Bossick, came to my door, and I had never met them before. And they knocked on my door and they're like, "You study motivation?" And I said, "Sure." And they're like, "Come work with us." And so we did. And it was just one of those things. And that was something that it really woke up my research line a bit. And because I was studying the same thing over and over again, and I was getting bored with it, and I was trying to publish on the same topic that thousands of people had already published on. But this, when I went and I started collaborating with these two individuals, and one was in public health and one was a geographer, and just seeing how psychology was new to them. And so they were getting really excited when I would say things. And I realized how much other disciplines could work together to really create something big. It was really rewarding. And I remember just saying something like, unrealistic optimism is blah, 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 blah. And they got so excited. And I remember the look in their eyes, like, that's brilliant. And we could use that. And so we did. And I brought in, now we have another faculty member, Dr. Larry Locker. He and our labs are both psychology, but we do a lot of the weather warning stuff still. So,
well, and again, because you spoke the generalist language, you could interpret and translate to them. Yeah. As someone who was knee deep in one super specialized area, probably couldn't have done that. Or probably if they come knocking on that door, if you are, I'm going to have to make something up here. If you are a developmental psychologist and you only study the age range of 8 to 12, and that is your niche, and those two gentlemen knock on that person's door, that person probably says, "No, I don't want to collaborate." But because you were a generalist and you're eclectic and you have a lot of interest and you see that value in that collaboration, they clearly did their research on you and what you're interested in, or they made a very fortunate choice.
It was a lot of fun. I do know that. But Yeah, but sometimes having the eclectic, it can sure make it hard to write an annual report.
Well, you mean for your annual faculty evaluation?
Yeah, like my line of research is everything.
Everything I'm interested in.
Yeah.
But hopefully that means, honestly, on a serious note, that means that you should never be bored.
I'm never bored.
Because if you're bored, it's your fault. Because
exactly.
Hopefully Georgia Southern is a kind of place parallel to Boise State. Nobody tells me what my line of research has to be. I just have to be relatively productive and include undergraduate students.
That's very similar. Very similar.
Yeah. So, Karen, I've almost taken an hour of your time, so I want to be mindful of that. But I also wanted to ask you, were there any things that you were expecting to chat about today or hoping to chat about today that we haven't mentioned yet?
Not that I can think of.
Did you want to talk about introductory psychology any at all, or the IPI, or anything going on in the classroom, or any research lines that maybe aren't on your website that you want to chat about, or anything like that?
Oh, I am doing some work on teaching psychology to preschoolers.
It is mentioned briefly on your website. Only a generalist could pull that off. Teaching, awesome. So you're talking about 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds?
Yes, and it was based because my daughter was in those classes, and I was trying to figure out creative ways to spend time with her, but also have a line of research. And it's actually turned into something really big and fun. And I have undergraduates starting to join and graduate students starting to join that line of research as well.
Okay, so I'm going to say, yes, please. Would you describe that for me?
So a lot of time, we want everyone to know that psychology is a science. And when my daughter was little, she always wanted to be a scientist like mommy. And I would buy these preschool science books, and psychology was always left out of them. And I started thinking, like, how do you connect that psychology is a science to these young children and plant that seed? And I started going into her classroom and teaching concepts like emotion, but we use the scientific method. And so we start off by saying, what would you predict? And then we would have them do it, like, how would they feel? And then we would look at a frequency chart afterwards, and they would evaluate it. And if you've ever watched Sid the Science Kid, I don't know if you have or not, it is a lot like that, except it's using psychological concepts to teach the young kids. And so it can be it's a lot of fun. It's a great service activity that also involves a little bit of research as well.
And so have you found that you can be successful in teaching psychology and psychological principles to kids at that young age?
Mm-hmm. So it takes a little bit of research. So I have to go and review what concepts would children understand at that age group. And so, like, basic emotions, like how would you feel if you were happy or sad? They like that one a lot. The idea of conformity, like what would happen if we're all pointing up versus only one? What would your teacher do? They like that one. So other concepts would not be available to at that age.
One summer, I did a demo with high school students. Actually, maybe 8th, 9th graders, somewhere in there, Coke Pepsi challenge. To demonstrate scientific method. Obviously, you wouldn't do Coke Pepsi challenge with 3-year-olds, but you could do the orange juice challenge. Can you detect the difference? Or the Capri Sun challenge, let's say. Can you detect 2 different flavors or something like that? You might be able to teach research methods. Can they hypothesize the difference between 2 different similar flavors? Are these 2 flavors similar or different? J&Ds and stuff like that.
That's a good idea. Really
I don't know if it's a good idea or not. I'm just trying to think what would work in a classroom of 3 or 4-year-olds. The other thing that strikes me, and again, I'm always hesitant to make suggestions that make more work for other people. So we might end up editing this part out because we might not want this one. But when I was listening to you just now, I started thinking, Karen, why don't you write a children's book?
So
here we go.
There we go. Yeah. So that has been on the docket of something to do.
Oh, good.
Yes. Yes.
Good. I don't know if it would be in their wheelhouse, but APA has Imagination Press. And I believe they have been very successful from what I understand. Now, I think those books are more clinically oriented towards helping children who are experiencing clinical difficulties, but they're writing for that age range. And why not start a science-based line of books on teaching the science of psychology? It's a yes and. Obviously, keeping going into the classroom and having demos of scientific principles. And why not have a line of books?
It would be fun.
I think you should write the first one and then become the editor for the line.
That would be fun.
I'm actually not kidding. When it comes to books, I don't mess around. I don't kid around about a topic like that. I just had an idea for an experiment. The kids that young probably would have a lot of fun with the Stroop effect, don't you think?
Yes.
They probably know the colors.
The colors and shapes.
Yeah.
Colors and shapes. They can't read yet.
Effect. Yes. Oh, that's right. So the true Stroop effect would be based on reading. That's true. Yep.
Yeah. And that one works really well but some of the illusions, like the molar liar illusion, they understood that very well. So.
Yeah. Oh, the illusions they would probably have a really good time with. Yeah.
They had a lot of fun with those.
Yeah, college students do too.
Who doesn't like a good illusion?
Yeah, although if you overdo it too much, then it becomes, okay, what's the point? Yeah, anything else? Karen, anything else that I want to make sure that we don't leave anything on the table that you were hoping to chat about today?
I don't really think so.
Okay.
I think I'm good.
I did peek at your website, but I don't really ever have a list per se. So I don't have a checklist. I tend to go with the flow. I usually do a backwards chronology. We did that. Anything coming up in the future that you're looking forward to? Or what classes do you normally teach? What's your typical lineup of classes that you teach?
So I'm teaching intro in the fall, and then I'm teaching a capstone course. And in this semester, I'm teaching health psychology, which I consider my baby. And then I'm teaching a new psychology capstone course and research design, the grad level research class this term.
So is the capstone course like a thematic one, like the psychology of evil? Do they have different rotating themes, or is it a history and systems?
We changed it this year, and I'm going to give a shout out to Jane Hallinan for inspiring the idea. But what we do is we basically summarize all the program learning outcomes in this one course. And my students are identifying a problem in the world, and they're developing something to solve that problem.
Nice.
Based on psychological research. So they're developing a psychology-based intervention for it.
So they're going to take what I've heard called in other contexts a big, hairy problem, climate change or poverty or homelessness or something like that. And they're going to solve it on paper.
And they're going to solve it. Yep. And they're developing the tools that are needed to solve this problem.
Very cool. And health psychology, if you need a recommendation, I know a guy who can recommend a cultural health psychology textbook.
Yes.
I know there's a bunch of choices out there, but he knows one that he would like to recommend to you. So, I got a guy.
Yes, I know. Yep, it's a great book.
Yeah, I've never looked at it. I don't teach health psychology. Who knows? And plus, he doesn't even listen to the podcast, so he's never going to hear this anyway. So you'd think a buddy would listen, but no, not so much. Karen, I just want to say thank you so much for not only being a guest, but all that you're doing, because I really, honestly, and this is going to be hard for you to hear, but please just hang in there. I really do believe that you're a role model for us, that you are really taking psychological science and not only doing it in the classroom, but out of the classroom with Squishy, with your daughter, with your students. This is really what we all should be doing. And thank you for doing it. And thank you for sharing it with me today.
Thank you so much for having me and for those kind words. I appreciate it.